right, we'll go live in 3, 2, 1. Good evening, everyone. Hello and welcome. My name is McKaylee. I work with Tattered Cover Bookstore. And first and foremost, I want to say thank you. Thank you for being here with us. Thank you for supporting local independent bookstores. I have to tell you, we wouldn't be here without you this past year or the past 50, because as those of you who might know, Tattered Cover is turning 50 years old this year, which is an amazing feat for a bookstore, and it's very, very exciting. So thank you for supporting us during this time and over the last several decades as well. Before we go any further, I want to let you know that closed captioning is enabled for those who might want it or need it. There's a black bar down at the bottom of the screen with a button labeled CC on it. You click that button, closed captioning is enabled if you want it or need it. And so just a little bit for those of you who may be joining us outside of the state of Colorado, Tattered Cover is a local independent bookstore located in the Denver metro area. We have 4 locations currently, soon to be 5. We're very excited about opening up our brand new children's location sometime in the summer of 2021, so keep an eye out for that. But right now, we are also very excited because our McGregor Square location, which is our old Lodo location, is moving down closer to Coors Field, and that's hopefully going to be opening sometime late May, early June. Keep an eye out for announcements on that. Lots of exciting things happening at Tattered Cover right now. And you can still come visit one of our 3 open locations. As long as you're wearing your mask over your mouth and your nose, you can come shop and browse for about 90 minutes or so. But if you're like me, want to shop in your pajamas, you can always do that online at tatteredcover.com to get all of your bookish needs. Also at tatteredcover.com is all of our events. And I'm telling you, we've got so many this month. We have over 25 events this month in May alone, which is a huge deal for a bookstore. Tomorrow, we have Bruce Cameron, who's the author of A Dog's Courage and all of those other wonderful dog books that we love so much. So he's going to be visiting us tomorrow. We have graphic novelist and cartoonist Liz Climo, who's going to be in conversation with Nick Chow, and that's on Wednesday. There are so many events out there. Check it out and register today. You can always get updates by joining our email list or following us on social media at Tattered Cover Bookstore. Now I have to introduce these amazing authors that we have tonight, these fantasy queens, as we've called them, because they deserve no less of an amazing title like that. We have Molly E. Lee, Tracy Wolf, Marlene Perez, and Alison Noel, and I'm going to give a quick little bit about each of them. Molly E. Lee is the author best known for her romance novels, Ask Me Anything, the Grad Night series, and the Love on the Edge series. Amber of Night is the launch of her new fantasy series, which comes out tomorrow. And then we also have Tracy Wolf. She's the New York Times bestselling author of the Crave series, which includes Crave, Crush, and just published Covet I just forgot how to pronounce words for a second there, and Court, which was releasing in fall of 2021. Marlene Perez is the author of paranormal and urban fantasy books, including the best-selling Dead Is series for teens, and she's going to be moderating our conversation tonight. And last but not least is Alison Noel, who is the #1 New York Times bestselling author known for the Immortal series, the Riley Bloom series, and Saving Zoe, which was adapted into a movie now available on Netflix. It is my true honor to welcome Molly, Tracy, Marlene, and Alison this evening. So we're going to unmute these ladies and have them appear. Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Look at you. There she is. There's
Hello.
Alison and Marlene. Molly and Tracy, hello.
Hi.
Let's get you all up here. Let me remove my pin. There we go. Now we can see everybody. I thank you all so much for joining us from all across the country. We're so excited to have you. It is truly a joy to have some amazing YA fantasy titans here in the room. So I'm going to let Marlene take it away, but please know, all of you active in the chat right now, we will be doing a Q&A later in the evening, and that's where you're going to be submitting all your questions, is in that chat that all of you are very excitedly saying hello and congratulations right now. So Marlene, I'll let you take it away. Enjoy.
Thank you. All right, guys, we're going to talk writing fantasy novels, writing action scenes, writing kissing scenes. Let's see. Well, we're kind of here to celebrate Molly's book, so I'm going to start with just what was your inspiration for writing Ember of Night? Molly, take it.
Thank you so much. Yeah, no, thank you. I'm so excited because it comes out tomorrow, Ember of Night. I'm so pumped about it. I actually had the inspiration several years ago. I won't say how many, in college when I took an ancient religions class, and I loved all the universal themes of good and evil, and I really wanted to mess with those themes and kind of depict a world where not everybody's wholly good, not everybody's wholly evil, and the people you expect to be evil might not be, and the people you expect to be good might not be. So that's kind of how Harley and Draven were born.
I really kind of think that like the fans of Supernatural, the TV show, that seems like that would be a natural, like those fans should be out buying your books like immediately, because it just seems such a good kind of matchup to me. I think that
Thank
would
you.
be,
Yeah, no, I love that.
Yet, but I think that would be a good match. Okay, so what about Alison? Do you want to talk about what inspired you to either start writing fantasy or specifically Evermore, or the book that you have coming out next year with Untitled Chapter?
Well, Evermore, briefly, I was inspired to write fantasy because I had just gone through a time of really deep grief where I had lost several loved ones in a very short amount of time. And it got me thinking a lot about, these people were right here and now they're not. And where did they go? And what does this mean? And facing my own mortality and all of that. And it sort of set me on this journey to make peace with that grief, which found its way into Evermore, which ultimately became the Immortals series. I do that a lot with books. I start with either something I'm deeply interested in or a question or problem I need to solve for myself. And, during the writing of Evermore, I healed my grief, the character healed her grief. And I was able to make some semblance of sense with this loss that occurred. With Stealing Infinity, my book with Entangled that comes out next year. I'm really excited about it. That's a time travel book. It's a fantasy, and I call it my COVID book because I was basically sitting here in quarantine thinking, well, I don't want to waste this time. I always complain I don't have enough time, and now I have nothing but time as I'm just sitting here in my office. So I want to use it for something, but I also would like to escape this world and the state of the world as it is right now. So, I created my own, and I created one that involved time travel and, a lot of things that are really interesting to me and fun for me, and art and history. And it was this perfect vehicle just to escape that current depth of sadness and despair and uncertainty that all of us were facing. And once again, kind of like Evermore, I wasn't really sure what I was going to do with it. I sort of wrote it for me. And then when I finished it, I said, well, I did just write a full book. Maybe I should try to publish this thing and see what happens.
What about you, Tracy? What was your initial inspiration? I know, because I've talked to you about vampires before. I know that you said that you wanted to write a vampire novel for a long time, but that you wanted to wait until you found the perfect idea, right? And how did that kind of come about?
Well, it was kind of a group of different things. I have always wanted to write a vampire novel. I've written witches and dragons in the past, mermaids, superheroes, a bunch of different things. And I was always really nervous about dipping my toe in the vampire pool, because when you do, there's a lot of really giant and amazing work before mine. Well, of course,
I just wanted to stab some vampires.
Of course, and so it's really nerve-wracking, right? It's a little scary to try and put your ideas out there with all these great vampire stories that have come before. But when Entangled kind of came to me, my publisher, and asked said they wanted to bring vampires back, I couldn't pass up the opportunity. I'd been dying to write a boarding school book. So I proposed this idea with this boarding school and with this alternate, this world that I've created up there in Alaska at Katmere Academy. I'm pretty far from Alaska. And
in your head, you're not.
Thankfully, my editor loved it, and we've kind of been working on the world ever since. But it is. I mean, tell us about yours, right? Isn't it a little nerve-wracking trying to jump into the vampire pool?
Yeah, my idea, I had it for a long time about like, what if the Cullens were monstrous a-holes? And so I always wanted to write it and same thing with you, it wasn't the right time, or I had other books that I was doing, but always in the back of my mind, I had this idea that they would go to a party and they would meet vampires, and that's kind of how the afterlife of the party began. And I just knew, because I read a lot of vampire books and I watched a lot of shows about vampires. I really was kind of intimidated at first to try to figure out, how can I do my own thing with these vampires? What are my vampires going to look like? So that's part of the next question I have about like world building, because even if you set your book in the contemporary world, which I did, I'm pretty sure most people don't like come across vampires in their daily life. So setting world building choices are always really interesting to me, because as you're writing, you always have tons of choices. So how do you choose in your world building? Tracy, do you want to start? And then we'll.
Sure, absolutely. The thing about fantasy versus paranormal, or however you want to describe it, right? I've always been an urban fantasy kind of girl. My witches were urban fantasy, as were my dragons. And I love taking the supernatural, the spectacular, and putting it in the world that we live in, as opposed to creating an entirely alternate universe for them to exist in. I think there's something really exciting about that. And I don't know, I kind of like the idea of living next door to a vampire or a dragon. I'm a big dragon fan. But more than that, I think that it gives you a way to look at the world that we live in through a different lens. Because when you put them in our world, but you create this other microcosm within the world, right, that has so many of the same problems that we have, even though they may look different, the roots of them are the same. I think it provides this kind of wall, or this kind of step back for us to look at our own world without a lot of the emotion, a lot of the angst, a lot of the division that happens to be there. As for actual world building decisions, this is, I'll be honest, I love small world building. I love like, oh, this is what the horde looks like, or this is what their power is, or this is what this happens. The really big world building, I always have to stretch on. Like, if you're talking about goddesses or, whatever it is you're looking at. And so my editor and I go back and forth, which I think you guys can appreciate, because I think we all have the same editor. She's like, well, how can they do that? I'm like, because it's magic. That's how they can do it. And she's like, no, that's not okay. We need a bigger, and back and forth we go. So, world building is by turns exciting and terrible for me, I think.
Molly, is this your first fantasy novel? The Ember of Night is the first one that you've written, is that correct? So do you want to talk to us a little bit about, like, that's a big change, right? When you go from writing.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it is. It's a huge change. I've always wanted to write paranormal or urban fantasy, especially back when it was like, it blew up however long ago that was. I don't, the Twilight craze. I was like, oh, this is what I want to do, because it was what I was consuming. And I just missed that. I missed it. It became, they were moving towards contemporary when I got into the game. And so I loved writing contemporary, but I've always had just this deep love for paranormal worlds, like you guys were talking about, set in our modern day lives. This one takes place in Chicago, which I loved writing about, and then having demons come into it. But yes, I was so excited when I talked to my editor. She was like telling me about Tracy's awesome book that was just about to come out, and I was lucky enough to read it early. And I was like, yes, this is what I've been craving. This is what the world needs. We need to escape and fall back into those worlds where you can see the fight happening and you don't have to think about what's happening in reality. And so I was so pumped, and I told her this idea that I'd had, back in college, and we just took off from there. And I was like so excited to do it. So
Alison, what do you think? So Alison and I think Tracy too, wrote paranormal back in 2008, and like when the Twilight.
Back in the day, yes, we did.
So what do you think about the differences in world building and what is your process, and how do you choose what your world building rules are going to be?
I don't know that it's like so entirely different for me. I wrote like 7 contemporaries before I wrote the Immortal series, and that was back in 2009. That was my first paranormal world. But I so immerse myself in my head, in the characters and in their lives and all that. What flows from there just sort of feels like a natural extension of who they are, and these characters that I've been living with for a while before I commit them to the screen. The one thing that I really consider a lot is sort of the rules that we set in these worlds, because once you set down these rules, I mean, this is how this world works. You got to stick with it. You've married
Right.
these rules now. To suddenly break them later to help your plot along, it's a dicey thing to do. And so that was sort of a new thing to me. It's like, well, if I put this in here now, later on, I want to be able to do this, so how am I going to marry those two ideas? But for me, I just like, with this latest book, Stealing Infinity, I just really saw this girl who first is living in the real world, wishing she was anywhere but, kind of like how I was feeling at the time during
All of us.
quarantine, and then just sort of getting whisked into still the real world, but with these elements that she never suspected were out there. And I like this idea. I like this idea that there's a world that all of us can see, and then there's a world that only some of us can see. And, I find that fascinating. I have for years. Casper the Friendly Ghost was my favorite cartoon as a kid. And it's been that way ever since.
Yeah, I agree. Like I have that same thing, the same theme. Like it's the world that everybody sees, and then there's this hidden world. And I actually even call it the hidden world, where there are all these things happening, and maybe we don't notice, or we explain it away by just saying it's something else. And so like my vampires are not necessarily romantic vampires, but when I was writing them, I was really using it as a way to kind of make sense of some things that were happening in our world, but I didn't want to address it as like what was happening in our world, because I didn't want to think about it. So I kind of like made up why they would behave that way. And it was because they were blood-sucking vampires.
I mean, there's something really exciting, right, about the idea of creating a world that plays by whatever rules you wanted to play by. Even if there are bad people or bad creatures or bad whatever in that world, I don't know. There's something empowering, but there's something that's like almost a relief, right? Like, I know what the rules are. I can set them, and then everybody plays by the rules that are important to me and that I want. I think for so many of us, it's so many times, particularly in the middle of this pandemic, right? We feel powerless and everything is out of our control. And there's something really, because I wrote 2 of the 3 books that are out so far during the pandemic, right? I wrote Crush and I wrote Covet, right? In my house, along with, trapped with everybody else. And there's something very, I think, wonderful and empowering and exciting about being able to create a world that isn't like the one that we were forced to live in for so long.
Yeah. Speaking of those bad characters, I mean, how fun are they to write?
Oh, so fun. So fun.
Yes.
So fun.
Right? I mean, they're always, they get the best lines. They get to do all the things that maybe aren't society approved, but you get to also do it through them. And yes, they will get their comeuppance perhaps, but it's pretty fun to put yourself in those shoes for a little while.
And just like the research, right? So it's always fun to do the research. Like my husband's like, oh my gosh, I hope nobody ever looks at your search history because it's pretty, how to poison, how to, like, what happens with blood spatter. I mean, like you have to really, because even if your rules are your rules, they have to make some sort of logic, right? And you still want them to kind of like fit within the boundaries of maybe human behavior, right? Or like, just physical. If it is going to be something completely out of the realm, you have to kind of explain it without going on a 10-page, I did my research and right? Because when you're world building, it has to be kind of, I don't want to say natural, but it has to feel natural so that your reader doesn't feel like they're all of a sudden going, and now we are going to discuss the history of, especially with fantasy, I think too, right? Like you're building that world, but you can't throw it all at the reader at once. You have to just kind of put it in there, action and information, right? Not just information and then action.
Yeah, so part of building that, making that world feel authentic, and I mean, maybe this is crazy, but I feel like I'm writing about real themes anyways. I don't feel like I'm
absolutely.
Like it's real in your head, right? Like
the immortal. Well, no, I mean they're real for real. Like in the Immortals, there are people that believe in a Summerland, and so I studied that extensively. There are people that practice, witchcraft. There are I did past life hypnosis and did past life regressions because Ever has several past lives. And, for soul seekers, I did an introduction to shamanism course because that's a very real spiritual path. And, for this book, I read tons of stuff on how time travel is technically possible, and so I don't view it as like I'm just making stuff up. I just, apply. I'm taking a course at the Ryan Education Center right now, an introduction to parapsychology, learning about ESP and telepathy. These are real things. And so, and they are studied. And so you can find information on there. And it just makes your world feel more authentic and like you're writing with more authority.
Well, I think it's more fun too. I think it's really exciting to blend the real and the mystical, right? Mm-hmm. And one of the things I put into Crush was portals. I put in these portals in the middle of this game in particular.
The portals are real.
Yeah, and they came about because all of the big, really brilliant nuclear physicists in the world talk about these portals, particularly in that area of the world, right up in the North Pole. And if you're up in the North Pole and you happen to hit the exact right spot at the exact same right time of day, it is theoretically, according to these theoretical physicists, will open a portal to the sun. I mean, and you will be transported to the sun and you will die, of course, because you were on the sun. But the idea that these are real things. And then how do I take that and use it in my world? And oh my gosh, I just had something funny that occurred to me while you were talking about search histories. I wrote this book several years ago called Doomed, which was a techno Armageddon kind of book, kind of thriller. And my family was actually really, my ex now, but my husband at the time was particularly concerned about my search history as I was writing that book, because I remember I was Googling what were the most vulnerable nuclear power plants in America and what would cause catastrophic meltdowns in the most vulnerable plants in America. and he was like, I am not going to prison because this is what you've decided to do.
The FBI or the CIA,
news comes out somewhere, right?
Oh my God. Molly, what does your search history look like?
It's gotten a little dark. It's gotten a little dark while I was doing research for this book. There's so many religious lores for so many different types of things, the Armageddon story, the apocalyptic story, but also the savior stories. And then, man, the deeper you go down that rabbit hole, I was having legit nightmares from some of this stuff because like you guys said, it's rooted in such deep, rich history. And every culture has their own, which is fascinating to me, but it's also, there's so many little threads that are interwoven that pop up in each story. And it's just pulling on those threads and finding what's at the end of them. It's just, it blew my mind. And I was even getting some messages from some people that read it early and they're like, this is freaking me out because I feel like it's going to happen. I feel like I'm going to turn around and there's going to be a demon there. And I'm like, I get you, man. I was having nightmares right along with you while I was writing this. So
we traumatize ourselves as we are doing our research.
Sure.
So that kind of brings me to our topic about action scenes, which I find sometimes action scenes to be challenging because you are dancing with a couple of different characters, and you have to kind of make sure that those, like, I don't know, the author of Room, she actually rolled her 6-year-old kid up in her rug to make sure that, like, so I'm just saying, like, sometimes you have to kind of do those, like, physical things to kind of plot that out or figure that out, or, like, could we really, stab someone with a drumstick, or like, things like that you kind of have to block. And so how do you guys work out your action scenes?
Early, I think, and I'll jump in. Early in my career, I actually have 3 sons. They're all teenagers, and one's a little older now. And for a long time, I love action scenes. First of all, let me just say, I love writing action scenes. It's probably my second favorite type of scene to write, and I love getting into it and whatever. But I used to, like, literally, they're big Dungeons and Dragons players and Ren Fair nerds and all of that, and so they have, like, all the different swords from Comic-Con and Ren Fair and all that. And we would literally, like, just destroy the game room, as I was like, well, like, what would happen this? And they're giant, right? They're like 6'5", my boys. And so, like, I jump on them and, like, and whatever. And we have like, used to have a lot of fun. We do that a little less now, because I think I'm more, after doing it for so many years, I feel like I've got the rhythm to it and whatever else. But yeah, anytime I'm like, I'm not sure this would actually work this way, one of my boys will, volunteer, and we will, try it out and see. It's usually me who ends up on the floor, but we'll see what happens.
I wrote a Dungeons and Dragons book for
Oh yeah?
the Coast. Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
That is so cool.
Yeah. Long time ago.
That is really cool. Oh my gosh, my youngest will be incredibly impressed.
It's like Mirror Stone, which is the children's imprint for a tiny time. They had books based on Dungeons and Dragons, the Dungeons and Dragons world, and I wrote one way back.
Awesome.
That's
All right,
cool.
so Molly, why don't you take that next and tell us a little bit about how you kind of block your action scenes.
Oh yeah, I love action scenes. They're, again, just like Tracy, my second favorite type of scene to write. I really love it when the action comes into play with the kissing too. It's like super my favorite. But I'm a diehard Marvel girl, so I'm always about like the big circle scene, the camera's going, Cap's doing this, Hulk's doing this, Loki's up here doing this. I love that kind of just fast pace, hitting each beat. Of course, it takes me longer because I'm like, oh wait, I totally forgot about this guy. He's just standing there doing nothing. And so I definitely go through several.
Yeah.
Right. So I go through several drafts of the action scenes, but if I ever have something that I don't fully understand, this is why I love the internet. We're so blessed. There's a lot of Krav Maga in Ember of Night, and that's kind of what Harley is trained in. And I watched like countless classes and videos and techniques and studied it. And, I feel like Tony Stark when he's like, when did you become an expert in that? Well, last night. And it's like, I feel like I could do it because I studied it so much, but I probably would look terrible doing it. But it's just, it's fun to study those type of scenes and then just going to my favorite action movies and just trying to really take from the people who have done it before. And then of course, if I'm like, I don't know if this would work, my husband's always ready to like grab a fake dagger and like show me how it works. So I'm really lucky in that regard.
How about you, Allison?
Well, I mean, Marlene, sometimes you have to put your husband in the trunk of the car and drive him on the block and just see how that goes.
As you do.
As one does.
As one does.
So he's a good sport and he has stood in for a few fight scenes, few kissing scenes, few trunk of the car scenes. I just scratch whoever's handiest, and it's usually him, especially during the pandemic. So.
Well, my husband is like super practical, and he kind of has like that engineering techie mind. So I'll ask him something and he'll be like, that can't help it. No, that's not the way that works for several different things. So I agree. And then I also find that like the internet is amazing for both. Like if you're writing about a place that you just kind of maybe haven't ever been to, or if like Molly said, she's looking at Krav Maga, you can find anything on the internet. Like on YouTube, you can find like how to play guitar or, you know, whatever you need. Like I like music, but I'm not musical. And so I would watch Dave Grohl from Foo Fighters when he did the drum challenges with that 10-year-old girl. I would watch stuff like that just to kind of see like, oh, well, that's how a drummer does it, right? And so I think I agree. It's like really visual assistance is really helpful when you're trying to figure out like some of that stuff, like how do they hold their drums and what would a band do and who's in a band and how many players and is the lead singer always a jerk? Just kidding. All right, so I know everybody said that fight scenes are their second favorite, so that means kissing scenes are probably their favorites. Is that correct? Anyone? Yeah? Okay, so like sometimes, like maybe this is just me, but like sometimes I am kind of shy about kissing scenes. Like sometimes Liz will be like, or Stacy will be like, can you like do a little more? Can you do a little more? And I'm always like, oh, okay. But at first, like it's a little intimidating, right? Because you don't want it to be, you want it to be romantic, right? And you want it to feel something. And so sometimes those first drafts you really have to kind of like work a little bit with, right? To get that to convey the emotion, especially with teen novels, I think, right? Because when you're a teen, you may be experiencing like love for the first time, or at least a crush for the first time. So how do you kind of work through the emotions your characters are experiencing as they kind of have those romantic scenes, and then also just like the technical aspect of it, right? Okay, so let's start with Alison this time.
You know, I when I write, I'm so immersed in my character's head and point of view that I'm just like, I'm no longer me. I am now whoever I'm writing. And so I am just sort of feeling how she feels about the boy and in front of her, or whoever's in front of her, and this moment that's building. And, you know, my job is to make it as sort of, especially that first one, you know, I want to make it as sort of intriguing and alluring and, you know, epic as possible. Perhaps if the scene calls for that. Maybe it calls for a really bad kiss, you know, I don't know. But I can't say like I overthink it in the beginning. I just sort of am in the scene. I'm like a method writer. I know people like write where they're the character, and the people that write they're outside the character, directing the characters. I am the character. And so I'm just sort of doing what I'm seeing in my head that this character would do. I revise everything a million times. So, you know, that first rough draft is just
get it out there.
Getting it out. Yeah. And then I spend loads of time going back and building on it. And for like Selling Infinity, you know, I could not wait to get to that kiss scene. Like I was like at the beginning of the book going, when is she going to kiss this guy? You know, and they hadn't even met yet. So I was like, by the time I got to that place, I was like so ready to make this kiss a moment for both of them that, you know, I could feel good about and they could feel good about.
How about you, Molly?
Yeah, I totally agree. I tend to be very in the character's voice and stay in the voice while I'm writing the scenes. And so there's that natural buildup. And just like Alison, for this book especially, I was like, okay, they need to be kissing already. It's like chapter 2. I'm like, okay, hold on. We can't do that. So just this awesome buildup. And so by the time that we do get there, it's like an unleashing, you know, and So I never feel shy about it. I'm probably that author that the editor's like, you might want to take it back a little bit, but I fall in love with these characters and I can't help it. So I'm like, we're just going, I'd rather trim back than have to put in more. So I don't know. I can't, like, it's funny because even my husband will be like, when I come out of the office, he'll be like, are you here yet? Or are you still in that world? And I'm like, I need like 10 minutes to pull out of that transition, even if it's a dark scene or a grief scene or, a fight scene. I'm like, I feel like it for several minutes, depending on how intense the scene was after I get out of the office. So yeah, I feel just like Alison. I'm very in it to the point where I have to kind of unwind back. So yeah, when we get to the kissing scene, I just kind of go with, it makes me sound kind of mad, like I go with what she thinks is what she feels, it's just kind of, she's taking me on the ride, which is kind of voyeuristic, but anyway, I love it.
The kissing scenes are my favorite, of course, but my other favorite is the sexual tension that leads up to it, right? Like everybody talks about it. It's like by the time you get there, right? I love the back and forth dialogue between the hero and the heroine, or between the two main characters.
Yeah.
I love it so much. And I love using that to build to the point that, even if it's not always nice, like I don't know if you know anything about the Crave series, whether it's with Jackson and Grace or Hudson and Grace particularly, right? There's a lot of back and forth that goes in before 2 books later we finally, get their kiss, or a book and a half later we finally get their kiss, and I love that. I love stoking that fire so slowly, so that when it does happen, it's like an explosion and a relief all at the same time, right? Like, oh my God, there it is, right? And at that point, I do feel like it kind of writes itself. I mean, I think that all of us are very aware of our responsibility to our readers, our responsibility, obviously, to deliver a good story and to give the payoff on that. But also, like I'd mentioned before, I'm a mother of 3 boys, right? I take that very seriously, and I take it very seriously when I write my male characters and my female characters. Consent and respect and all of those things kind of go into that scene. And I think that they make it hotter. I think that it makes the explosion better, right? But I think that we all, in our own ways, even as we're in there in the characters' minds, as the character, whatever else, I think we are still also really working to show as healthy, I think, a relationship as we possibly can, because I do think that we have that kind of responsibility to our readers, younger or older. I think that there's a lot to be said for that, and I think that there's a lot that's really sexy about that too.
I'm a big fan of like the slow burn. Like the slow burn romance is my favorite, and it's like the hottest, and also it's like it's the safest at the same time, because those characters really know each other, and it doesn't matter if maybe there are times that they're mad at each other, or they hate each other, or they're like emotionally mad, like just want to like stomp off. It's just the fact that they know each other, and they know each other enough that scene is meaningful to both of them. And so I kind of just sometimes my character starts talking to me, and I just like, listen and go along for the ride. But then sometimes I think there are the scenes that that they should emotionally happen at a certain point. And sometimes for me, I have to build those in, that emotional like change, because you definitely don't want it to just be like this, right? Like you want it, like you said, Tracy, to build and build and build and build and build. And I would be like, okay, they're together, let's go. But my favorite books are the ones where it's really a slow payoff. So that's, I agree. Oh, perfect timing. We're done talking about kissing.
No, please keep doing it. This is like a master class. We're getting 4 beautiful, wonderful women telling us these perspectives on writing. There's such great conversation in the chat that's going on about how inspirational you all are, how this is great advice. So on behalf of the viewers, thank you for this, and thank you for the books you've given us. So we want to turn it over to audience Q&A, which is very exciting. And I'm sure that all of you have burning questions. Feel free to ask them in the chat. Which one I think is a really great one to start off with, just considering how we've talked about writing as a craft, is what is your best advice for overcoming writer's block? And I'd love it for any one of you to take it. All of you look very contemplative. Tracy looks like she's like, I don't even know.
I'll start. Research.
Yeah, please do, Allison.
Research. Yeah.
Okay.
I honestly, I don't really believe in writer's block. I think that you're just stuck because you forgot what your story is about or why you're there or where to go next. And all of these problems can be solved with research, whether you're researching your world, researching your characters, researching the reason why you thought it was a good idea to sit down and start this anyways. You know, but
I want to be a writer.
Yeah, it's never failed me. And I actually learned that from Robert McKee, who's like an absolute master at story. And if it works for him, it certainly should work for you too.
He actually has a great book titled Story, which is
I read
quintessential, for any writer.
I credit that book for getting me my first book deal, 100%.
There you go.
I think one of the other things to do, I think we tend to get writer's block, like Allison says, because we don't know what to do next. We've written ourselves into a corner. Something didn't go the way we thought it was going to. Something did go the way we thought it was, but it's wrong. And what I try to do, I think a lot of us sit down and we write until we run out of things to say, and then we have to go think about it or whatever else. I try not to do that anymore. I try to write right up to like the most exciting thing that's going to happen. And then I stop there. Because Dorothy Parker, the American short storyist, who I'm a huge fan of, used to say that writing is the art of applying the ass to the sea. And I think that there is something really, really true about that, right? On good days, I am happy to sit there and type away. On bad days, I would rather clean my son's bathroom. And again, 3 boys. So, I think that if I leave off on a note where, like Allison had said, she'd been dying for that kiss, right? There was a scene I had been dying for in Crave. It's the Aurora Borealis scene between Jackson and Grace. And I had wanted it from the moment I started the book. And I think that if you sprinkle scenes like that throughout and you write and you stop yourself the day before, you're never going to have writer's block because you're like excited about what you're going in. Always write, not till you don't know what happens next. Write only until you know exactly what happens next. And then that makes it so much easier to sit back down the next time and write more.
That's awesome. And Molly and Marlene, I want to hear from you as well, but I want to just warn people in the chat to beware any spoiler related questions. And I'm telling you right now, I'm not going to ask them. So just please note that as we're reading them, and please be respectful to your other viewers who may not have had the treat of reading these books or finishing them at the moment. So just I wanted to warn that because we were getting some in there. But Molly, Marlene, do you feel the same way? Do you wait until you get to that exciting moment, or you research is your trick of the trade? What do you guys do? Molly, can you kick us off there?
For me personally, and I know every writer is different, I dive back into music. Music is like my catalyst for moods, tones, scenes, everything. Like if I get stuck and I need to take a step back, I'm like, I'm going to turn on that playlist. And I'm like a playlist nut. So I'll have a playlist for like when I'm making character sketches. I'll have a playlist that gets more sharpened once I start writing. I'll have a score, like it's just instrumentals, like a movie. I'm crazy about that. So whenever I get really, really stuck, I walk away from my desk, I put my headphones on and I just listen. I'll probably take the dog for a walk or something and I'm like, oh yeah, that's why they're angry, or that's why they're excited, and then I get back to it. So it's always been music for me.
Nice. Marlene, what's your trick?
I do a combo, and I have to say that one of it is the music track also, but I use it as a pre-writing thing. So I listen to it before I start writing, and that kind of gets you back into that world really quickly. But what I'll say is that the best thing to do is to get away from the computer, take a notebook, and write by hand. I know people hate to hear that, but that's what I do. I'm actually writing a new book, and there's this author, Mary Atkins, who says do the 4 notebook or the 5 notebook. And so she says, write your whole novel straight through just using 5 notebooks. I've never done that. I usually write by hand, write by the computer, maybe print it out and then read it and then move on. But for this new project I'm working on, I'm just going to try 1 notebook and see if I can write hand, because your brain uses different skills when you write by hand. When you are at the computer, your little editorial brain is on. And then also Norma Fox-Mazer, I heard her speak at SBWI National. She puts a fedora, well, she did, she's no longer alive. She put a fedora over her head and she sat at the computer and just typed. And so that's another way of letting go of that internal editor. So my advice for writer's block is for first draft, right? So I don't know. And then if this is a published author and she's experiencing, or he or they are experiencing writer's block because of outside things, get rid of those outside things, because I really had a hard time in 2020, like many people. And so I had to, no more Twitter. I had to put myself on a social media, no, you stay here and you write, and stay away from those things that upset you. Stay away from those things that hamper your creativity. Like, if you're a published writer, don't go on Goodreads.
There you go.
I mean, just so it depends. It really depends. But those are the things I found.
And can I jump in really fast? The other really cool thing about writing stuff by hand, because I do the same thing, because it does use a different part of your brain. And I tend to, if I get stuck, I turn to a notebook and I just write 3, 4, 5 pages and then jump back into the story on the computer. But one of the greatest things about it is I have 8,000 notebooks floating around my house. Yeah. But every once in a while you'll pick them up and you'll be like, oh, this was the notebook that, that I was writing this book in, and you're transported. And it's great because you get to see the very first draft of, God knows how it, ended up on the page. Right. But it's really a fun little surprise when you pick up a notebook to write down a phone number and, oh, there's, Tempest, or there's Pandora, or there's, Grace.
That's wonderful. And I've heard Neil Gaiman say the same thing. There's a lot of authors that do that, with the first draft being by hand, which is a wonderful advice. I think all of you had great pieces to add into there, but if anything, it just teaches you and teaches everybody watching that you have to find it for yourself. And there's not one right answer when it comes to it, but that's why we have so many wonderful voices here. So we have time for maybe about 2 more questions here. And this is one actually that got asked by 2 different people. How do you know when a book is done, and how do you avoid over editing? Molly just winced, and that makes me want to go to her first.
Oh man, that's such a hard question, because again, I think it depends on who you're writing the book for, what audience you're writing it for, what publisher, that sort of thing. I think it's definitely, I always tell aspiring writers who ask questions about this to have a set of trusted peers, people that you really trust and you admire, to give you honest feedback. You need the people who are going to sugarcoat things for you, and you need the people who are going to be like, look, you got to get rid of that. That's not working. And you need to be able to take that constructive criticism. And I feel like once it's made it through that round of peers who you absolutely trust, and then it's made it through your own round of edits, then it's ready to hand off to your editor. And then they're going to come back at you and tell you this is definitely not done. And then you're going to go through it again. And even me, I feel like even when it's published, it may not be done. And so it's I feel like it's always an ongoing process. Just like as a writer, you're never done knowing about this business. You're never done learning about your craft. I always tell them that. Never stop, always continue to say, yes, I can learn something new about this business every day. So that's my opinion.
That's great. Marlene's nodding. So do you agree with that, Marlene?
I think one of the things that it depends, right? One of the things is it depends on where you are at in your writing career, and what you mean by done. Do you mean done as in I finished a draft, I'm going to leave it alone for now? Do you mean it's done, I'm going to give it to my critique group? Do you mean it's done and for the first time ever I am going to submit? And those are all very different emotionally and creatively. So I would say if you are at the point where your critique group or your trusted friends have have read it and they're like, you should be submitting this. This is awesome. And something like fear perhaps is holding you back, because that is a real thing. My old critique partner used to say, real writers get rejected. And I really take that to heart, because this is not a business for people who are really discouraged by one no. So it kind of depends on where you're at. Like, I have friends who have been writing for years and haven't submitted yet. So I would just say, go towards the fear. Like, if they're telling you it's ready, like, yeah, you might get rejected, but just realize that people in publishing get rejected a lot. So
Marlene gave really, really good advice about, like, for the aspiring writer. So I'm not even going to touch that. I think you're right. I think all of those things. But if you're asking, just like for me, when do I know, like, it's time to write, type the end? My answer is when I'm not burning to write anything else. You know what I mean? When the questions are answered. You know, I start every book with a story question and with a theme that I really want to bring through the book, and more questions pop up along the way. But when I feel like I've answered them, and I know there are cliffhangers in my books, but I mean, I have answers to those questions, whether the readers do or not. When I feel like the questions are answered, I'm like, okay, this is it, you know? And yeah, of course my editor comes back and says, yeah, no, you need to do this or whatever else. But in general, I think that's it, right? You write, I write. I won't say why anybody else writes. I write because I have these characters that start talking to me in my head, and I have these stories and these what ifs. What if this happened? And then it happens, right? In my book. And then I write until it's done. And then when I'm satisfied, I think 98% of the time, not always, I'm 68 books in and I've messed up again, lots of rejections and lots of mess ups, because nobody's perfect. But I think once I've answered all the burning questions, I feel like pretty much the audience is going to agree with me. You know, my readers are going to be like, yeah, she's answered. And certainly by the end of a series, right, you get the answers that you're looking for, hopefully.
Alison, anything to add to that?
I'm going to go with what Leonardo da Vinci said, that a work is never finished, merely abandoned. And I believe that. I mean, yeah, I totally agree with Tracy. Like, when I have answered the questions and when I've hit a personal saturation point, I'm done. If I go back and read my very first book, I'm not changing the book. I'm not changing the story or the structure. I would certainly fiddle with some word choices and polishing and things like that. But, you know, there are so many levels of done, but I just hit a point where I've reached full saturation. There's nothing more I can say or do at that moment with these characters or this story, and therefore I'm done. I think part of the journey, though, as a writer is going from an aspiring writer to being a published writer to being a writer with a lot of books under your belt. It's just you learn discernment along the way. And that's just something that you can only get from experience. You know, knowing your own self well enough and knowing your own works well enough to know this is done for me.
I love that. This has been wonderful here. And you all have been such kind teachers to us in this last hour that we like to ask this question here at Tattered Cover and kind of turn it back on you. And so for each of you, and we'll go around the circle, so to speak here, but what did your latest book teach you? You can interpret that however you like. But Alison, you looked very contemplative there. Do you want to kick us off here?
No. No, actually my latest book taught me that, you know, no matter how, because I wrote it during the pandemic, I wrote it during a time of such despair and uncertainty and a lot of pain and grief out there in the world, that there's power in our own thoughts. It reminded me of the power of my own thoughts, the power of my own words, the power of my own energy, and the power of my own actions. And that, you know, like a tree with very deep roots, terrible things can be happening around me, but I can still stay upright. And writing that book and writing those characters sort of helped me get through that and reminded me that I didn't have to be so buffeted by the world. And I think that's a lesson that my protagonist learns as well. So
Oh yes.
you can tell me next year.
Marlene, what did your recent book teach you?
I think not to give up. That was like kind of a theme in the afterlife of the party was the main character goes after her friend, even under, really hard circumstances. And it's really, I was reminded that there's still hope in the world and that there's still like good people and good things can still happen. And same thing, I was writing a lot of that at the beginning of the pandemic, and then it came out. It was delayed because of the pandemic, and then it came out in February, right after some of the worst behavior we've probably ever seen at our Capitol. And so I just really still feel hope, and that made it all worth it, like to go through that and feel hope still.
Wonderful.
Hope
Tracy?
I talk a lot about the fact that I wanted Grace to be powerless when she starts this series, because there was a time in my life not very long ago where I really felt powerless, and it's where I kind of felt like I claimed my power. But one of the things I really enjoyed exploring through the entire Crave series is the different kinds of power there are and the different kinds of strength that people have, and particularly the different kinds of strength there are in women. We have a tendency to think, because we live very much in this, and have for so long, right, millennia, in this male-dominated kind of world that we live in, that there's only one kind of strength, and there's not. And one of the things that I've loved doing in all of my different female characters is showing all the different kinds of female and feminine strength there are. I mean, I think it's a struggle I've had in my own life. I have a very, very powerful, very strong mother that I grew up under. And I think my strength has always been a little different than hers. And I think for a long time, I didn't think that I was strong because I wasn't bombastic and in your face. And that wasn't kind of who I was, or who I am, I should say. And I think that in the Crave world, I've really come to really love all the different kinds of feminine strength that there are in the world.
That's awesome. And Molly, what did Ember of Night teach you?
Oh man, it taught me so much. But I think one of the main things it taught me was nobody gets to decide your destiny. Nobody gets to just tell you what your happiness is worth. And you don't need permission to be happy from anybody. Nobody's going to give you a medal for being miserable. Like this is something that comes up with Harley very often. Like she has people telling her from all different directions who she's supposed to be, how she's supposed to act, what she needs to do as in this fated world that she's driven in. And she's like, I'm not going to do that. I live for a certain person, and this is what I'm doing. And she kind of just takes ownership of her own happiness and what her definition of joy is, which doesn't have to match somebody else's. And just, it doesn't matter what you're born into, you get to decide your fate. So that's kind of what she taught me.
Thank you. I've snapped so many times, I've smiled so many times, and I know I'm not the only one. There are people just lots of yes queens and love it, and hearts and smiley faces. And thank you for this conversation. I want to, in the last 2 minutes that we have here, give each of you a chance to remind people who you are, where they can find you online, and anything else that you want to say before we end tonight. And we'll go in reverse order. Molly, let's kick it off with you and your new book coming out tomorrow.
Yes, Ember Night comes out tomorrow. You can buy it anywhere. Tattered Cover is a really great place. I believe I'll be doing some signed copies with you guys, hopefully. So yeah, yes, definitely check it out.
Yes, if you order online, you can put in your personalizations and we'll do signed copies with Molly. If you want a signed copy, put it in the comments section. But please continue. Sorry, Molly.
No, you're good. That's all I have for you. I hope you guys like Harley, and I reach out. I love hearing from you. So.
And Tracy?
I am Tracy Wolf, and I am writing the Crave series right now. You can find me online at tracywolfauthor.com. If you want, my best place to interact with me is either in my Wolf Pack on Facebook, and they named themselves, and I love that. They're the Wolf Pack. And that is my readers group. And also I hang out a lot on Instagram at Tracy Wolf Books. I am on Twitter and Facebook and everything as well, but I tend to be on Instagram the most. So come say hi.
Nice. Marlene?
I'm Marlene Perez. I'm the author of the Afterlife trilogy, which starts with the Afterlife of the Party. And I'm like Tracy, I mostly hang out at Instagram, and my website is marleneperez.com.
Wonderful. And Alison?
I'm Alison Noel. I'm the author of, probably best known as for the Immortals series. Saving Zoe was adapted for film. You can see that on Amazon now. And Stealing Infinity is coming out next February with Entangled. I'm super excited about that. You can learn more about my books at AlisonNoel.com, and you can find me most of the time on Instagram.
And you post the coolest photos up. You put the coolest photos.
Allison has a great Instagram. As you
Allison has an amazing feed. I love her photos from all her publishing all over the world. It's great fun to be on her feed.
Well, and it's been great fun to be here this evening. I'm McKaylee. I'm with Tattered Cover Bookstore. Thank you so much for joining us this evening, everyone. For some of you out there, it might be dinner time, and we recommend that you support a local mom and pop restaurant, local independent business. We would not be here without your support. They help your communities more than you know. We thank you so much. If the four of you will stick around while I close this out here, we encourage all of you to check out Alison Noel, Marlene Perez, Molly Lee, and Tracy Wolf's books, which you can get at tattercover.com. Thank you for joining us tonight, everyone. Stay safe and happy reading. Thanks all. And we're out.
Yay!
That was